Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me read you first an excerpt from one of the last chapters in Color and Character. In today's world, creating racially and economically integrated communities and schools requires deliberate action in multiple areas, from dedicated grassroots community building to public policies that foster mixed income housing and integrated schools. In Charlotte in 2017, that possibility seems less than promising. However, our actions are not the only thing that are needed, nor are the only thing that are going on. We also have a God who is active in the midst of doing this, and active bringing justice and bringing help. In Psalm 146, it is the beginning of the concluding 5 Psalms of the Psalter. It is a psalm that Jews prayed every morning. Praise the Lord, O my soul. I will praise the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God all my life long. Do not put your trust in princes and mortals in whom there is no help. When their breath departs, they return to the earth, and on that day their plans perish. Happy are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers. He upholds the orphan and the widow, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. The Lord will reign forever. God is at work in the midst of all of this. Let us pray. Oh Lord, you are at work. You have been at work, bringing your justice and your righteousness to fruition. Continue the work, O Lord. Continue it through us as we have these conversations. Continue it through our leaders and those in our community. Continue it in every aspect of our life and life together. We ask all of this in Christ's name. Amen.
So this is part 2 of 5. Last week it was that first 35 years of founding a segregated school, the civil rights movement. Today we're really lucky that we actually have 3 primary sources. A teacher and 2 students, graduates of West Charlotte, to talk a little bit about their experience about busing and being an integrated school. We're going to spend about 7 minutes for each person. Then I'm going to ask you to turn to your partner and say, what did I hear there interesting? And then we'll open up some questions for about 10 or 15 minutes and then do a wrap up. We're going to do this chronologically. The person who was there first at West Charlotte, who was the teacher, and then we're going to go to the eldest of the alumni we have, Jay, and we'll follow up with Jennifer, and then we'll go to questions. So Gail, come on up.
Okay, I'm Gail Fox, and I was a teacher at West Charlotte from 1973 through the fall of '88 when I changed careers and became a CPA. So, which I still do today, as a matter of fact. But my time at West Charlotte, first of all, I started out teaching at Hawthorne Junior High. And if you know anything about Charlotte, you know that's in the midst of the, I guess, African-American neighborhood, actually, at the time. It's probably changed a lot by now, I'm not sure. So that was very racially mixed there. So I was very accustomed to that. So when I went to West Charlotte, it wasn't such an adjustment for me. But I was asked pretty soon if I would be interested in coaching some of the sports. And so I was always enjoyed sports, so I said, of course. So I learned a lot by coaching, and I loved it, and I had great relationships with the girls that I coached. In fact, one year they called me the White Shadow because everybody on the team was black, but I didn't even pay attention to that. Somebody asked me, how many black girls on your team? And I'm like, oh, they're all black. So that was not hard for me at all. They were very protective of me. If something came up that wasn't pleasant, they were very protective. I was there also during the time when it was an open school. And so we had a lot going on then, and a lot of people coming and going and out of classrooms. And so that was a tedious time for teaching as well, because you felt responsible for those kids that might be wandering the grounds. But let's see. I loved West Charlotte. It was a great school during that time, even though there were some issues, I suppose, with busing. I don't recall kids telling me that they were unhappy to be there because they were bused there. I think they probably were at first, but once they got to West Charlotte and they felt the warmth of that school, they adjusted very quickly, and I'm sure these two can address that. I just felt it was a lovely place to teach, to the environment, the teachers. We still have a reunion every year, the faculty does. So it goes back to the early 70s, the faculty that comes to these reunions. So, like I said, we were supportive of each other. We had good rapport with the students. Unfortunately, I haven't read the book. The author did come and take me to dinner probably 17, 18 years ago. And she said she would send me a book, but I never got the book. So I didn't even realize it had been published until you guys contacted me. But now I do want to read it, because there are quotes from faculty that I'm still in touch with. So, but that's about all I have. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Let's have the other people first, and then we'll...
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Gail, and come on up.
So I'm Jay Witherspoon, and I'm a West Charlotte Lion. I don't do that. It's not something I'm proud of. I'm just ambivalent, and anyway, it's not something that I normally say with pride. But here today, I say it with some pride, and again, normally I would say that most people at church don't know that I went to West Charlotte. No real reason, just that I've lost that connection over time. Like Gail, I went to Randolph Junior High, a different high school, but it was integrated before it was time for busing for me to go to West Charlotte. I went to West Charlotte, started in '74, graduated in '77. Busing started in '70. So this was a local high school that I was able to walk to. I lived in the Cotswold area, kind of the corner of Randolph Road and Sharon Amity. And so that traditionally, that school would have gone to East Mecklenburg, certainly a white school before busing started in 1970. But I had some experience going to school with other black students, and it was as good as it can be at a junior high. So I had that experience. But I still remember being anxious about going to West Charlotte, going to the other side of town, to a black neighborhood. I was anxious about that. And I don't know that I was anxious, but everybody was talking about it so much that it made me anxious. And so in 1974, we went, and the whole neighborhood went. I don't remember having a discussion with my parents about, ways to avoid it. They were pretty conservative. I don't expect that they thought that we were going to save the world by going to West Charlotte. But it was just the rule. It was the law, and that's what we did. We didn't really explore other options. So I need to talk a little bit, that's kind of the background, and then a little bit about being at school itself. Let me start with the bus ride. Man, it started early in the morning. And I really don't remember what time it was, but I remember getting up before my parents and leaving the house before my parents to go catch the bus. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but just looking at the logistics, it had to be 45 minutes each way, maybe an hour. Couldn't have been much less than 45 minutes, just to pick everybody up. We were at the beginning of the route in my particular instance. And so it was a pretty long ride each morning. And the main thing that it really prevented was after-school activities. I mean, believe it or not, this was before cell phones. You know, if you got to school and something came up and you wanted to do something after school, you just couldn't do it because you couldn't make arrangements to get back home. And that was a significant downside of being bused across town, just the logistics of that. The teachers, I don't say this just because Gail's here, but the teachers were great. I was kind of a below the radar student. I was never in trouble. I was never a great student or a bad student. But I had some great teachers that really kind of drew me out and got me involved in things that I might not have been involved in otherwise. And I can confirm what I read in Color and Character. A bunch of white teachers. And I went back to my 1976, oh my gosh, yearbook has a picture of all the teachers. And many of them, most are white. And young. I didn't recognize that at the time either, but they're young. Based on these pictures, they just look very young. And that's really who I connected with. I can't say that I remember any of my black teachers. I'm sure I had some, but I don't really remember them. I remember several white teachers very well that had an impact on me. Interaction between black students and white students, it was good. I mean, in class, we just worked together, and that's what we had to do. And it went well. I don't remember having any issues from that perspective. But at lunch, blacks would sit with blacks and whites would sit with whites. Out in the quadrangle, we'd split up by groups, socioeconomic groups, not just race, but also kind of where we were in the pecking order. I don't think any different than any other school, any other high school. But that was the case. There were fights, often fights between the races. I remember being sent to homeroom one day because there was such a big fight, called a riot. And anyway, it wasn't an everyday thing. It wasn't very often, actually. But it was part of it. It just was not utopia at West Charlotte. But it was good, and we got along, and everybody seemed to get done what needed to be done, graduated out of school. There were some cultural differences. I played in the band, this is band class, not the marching band, my first year there. And it was different being in the band at West Charlotte. They could dance. Not me, not so much. Exactly. And there was, and the band, I didn't realize this till reading Color and Character, but the band was a big deal at West Charlotte. And I remember one of the few times that I called the principal's office, there was a group of white kids that were in the band class, and we were pressured, I would say, to join the marching band. So, at least for myself, I was too white, and it was not really an option. I played soccer, and so I had a good excuse, but there was some pressure to be involved and be integrated. And I remember Principal Haywood, I believe. Anyway, it wasn't a lot of pressure, but it was some inviting. I was invited, I think, to watch it. There were a ton of opportunities in West Charlotte, and I remember parents in our neighborhood asking me, how is West Charlotte? They were thinking about their kids and moving to go there. And I told them, it's fine, it's a good school, I enjoy going. I don't know if I said I enjoyed going, I was in high school. It was a good school, and one of the things that I remember telling them is that the opportunities are there. If there's something that you thought that you were going to be able to do at East Meck, you can do it at West Charlotte. If you wanted to play on the golf team, more of a white sport, then you can do that at West Charlotte. We had a soccer, first year soccer was played at West Charlotte, was in '74 when I was there, and I played on the soccer team. I couldn't have done that at East Mac because it was established and I would have played off and all that. Okay, thank you. And then I would just say, kind of finish up, my connection to West Charlotte ended almost immediately after I left. It was just on the other side of town. I just never had that connection afterwards. Maybe 1 year afterwards, this again, before cell phones, certainly before Facebook and my instance, Twitter, or any of that kind of stuff. It was just easy to lose that contact. And it was hard to maintain it. Some of it's my own deal. I didn't maintain those connections, especially to fellow soccer players. That's kind of been the main reason. I've never been to a reunion. Not even aware, I don't even know if they have reunions. My parents lived in the same house for 30 or 40 years after I graduated. It would have been easy for West Charlotte to find me if there was a reunion. I just don't know if they even happened. But that was not part of what took us to the future. So anyway, that's just my impression.
Good morning. Okay, well, I can speak to quite a few of the things that Jay just mentioned. I was I'll give you just some of the background in case you haven't read pieces of the book, but CMS in 1970 would have closed all the historically black schools in the area, with the exception of West Charlotte. They began to desegregate with a system, as many of you have read the book, that was referred to as one-way busing. And this would be the black children have left their neighborhoods and they're going into what has been neighborhood white schools. So that happened in 1970, and this all changed in about 74 with a plan that was created by a community advisory group. People had gotten together and they decided this wasn't the most fair way to do it. And so they began to include a more balanced integration plan where it involved many more CMS neighborhoods. So now there were 9 middle schools in the CMS area that would be moved into different parts of our neighborhoods or the schools. And so that began in 1974, which is when I started kindergarten. So I'm one of the few generations that began, like when that era of desegregation started. And then I graduated from West Charlotte in 1987. So I'd be about 10 years behind Jay. So by the time I got to West Charlotte, it was very well established. We didn't see the fights. I didn't even see the segregation at lunchtime. Those few things that were referred to were very different by the time that I came along. So I started at Cotswold in K through 6 at that time, and then Randolph Junior High 7th through 9th grade, and then moved over to West Charlotte 10th through 12th. So some of the changes for me, I had always walked to school because those schools were very close. Jay and I, sharing notes about this book, we actually lived in the exact same neighborhood, but didn't know it. You know, we were a little bit further apart as far as age. I had a brother who was about 3.5 years older, and I don't know, we haven't talked about him, but I'm not sure that you even knew him because there was just a bit of a generational thing. And my family didn't move into our house in Randolph Park until the early 70s. And you guys would have already been there for quite a while, yeah. So that now changed to from walking, which was something kids did back then. I know they don't now, but we used to walk home just with a small group of children. You'd pick crab apples, a dog would follow you home, you know, just the regular walking home from school type of thing. So that went from moving to a bus that picked us up at 5:15. I remember very well. And 10 years later, you know, you're adding the Charlotte traffic. So it picked us up at 5:15 on Addison Drive, and we were about an hour and a half one way. So you can imagine that, you know, that's pretty early, and that gets you pretty late getting home as well, as far as doctor's appointments, or if you wanted to stay and do any after-school activities. So I would kind of refer to what you said about the after-school activities were hard to maintain, or club meetings, things of that sort. Now, we would always go back for the football games because that band, you didn't show up for the team, you showed up for the band. So there was just displacement of some of the friends, of course, that I'd known in elementary school, and some people didn't choose to go to West Charlotte. There were still, in my time, people who would do a little secret transfer, like, no, actually, we live at the uncle's address in Matthews, and so they would go to East Charlotte. And then others who opted for private school, even though West Charlotte at that time was a very good place to be. And lots of people wanted to see where they could move to actually be able to go there. So you had both ends of the spectrum. I had new friends from many, many neighborhoods all over Charlotte. You can imagine that as a 16-year-old. Getting together outside of school was like a road trip, because you'd go to West Charlotte to pick someone up, and over off the Statesville Road to pick someone up, and then back over this way to do, you know, whatever activity or spend time at someone's house, and then bringing everybody back. So I'm sure my parents were, quite worried when I began not only driving to and from school, but getting together with friends, because they were all over the place. And then we talked about a little bit about the extracurriculars already. Outside of school. So although school itself was very diverse and a very accepting environment, I would say, at the time, most of the students returned home to a segregated neighborhood. So think about that. There was great West Charlotte pride, as the diversity really added to the richness of our high school experience. All were valued, and you learned not only to voice your particular opinions, but listen well. In other Charlotte communities, though, West Charlotte was coined West Chocolate. I remember very, very keenly. Hershey High. Those are names brought up in the book, and yeah, we had to defend it every time. So I can remember myself and others really having to defend the honor of the school and its value with our friends, community members, and even some family who wanted to know why I went to school over there with all those black people. So in the book, a former teacher of mine, Brian Tarr, and I actually babysat for his child. When I read his name in the book, I'm like, oh, Mr. Tarr. He really makes an interesting and very valid statement that I'm sure some of you have read on page 102, but I just want to share it. He lived near a number of families who avoided the school. And so that would be, he backed up to my neighborhood. I would walk to his house to babysit, and he would walk me home. He said, you realize that people who don't want diversity are the ones who are really missing out. Life is so much more rich because of diversity. And you know, we finally got to the point at West Charlotte where at least I would say, well, those white folks who don't want to come to West Charlotte, that's their problem. It's not our problem. They're the ones who are missing out. So life at West Charlotte, there was an acknowledgement that even though we were all very, very different, we were all needed, we were all included. It was important to have representation from all voices, all of us learning from one another. I'm sure you can imagine how this population was coming from diverse places. So many areas of Charlotte, the race was different, ethnicity was different, the languages were different. We had a ton of ESL students, which really added to the richness of it. Socioeconomic levels were different, family backgrounds, all of that to name a few, but it really didn't matter. Got it. There were rigorous courses offered, and we had guidance counselors, of course, that would work with us to ensure we were working at our own levels, and teachers really didn't accept laziness or complacency, and kids were expected to be self-motivated, and they expected greatness from all. So I actually have, and this one's quoted in the book as well, but the piece is yearbook. This is the 1995 yearbook, also 86. If you want to check them afterwards, I won't read them now because I'm running out of time, but there are a couple of interesting sticky notes that refer to the puzzle pieces and how we all come together. And so I brought all 3 yearbooks if you're interested in checking them out. Just to flip to a page and see the diversity in the student pictures is pretty amazing. So West Charlotte's spirit and energy has taught me many life lessons in my short time there. And as a result, I try my best to see character and remember the value of diversity and think beyond my own neighborhood when I consider the meaning of community. When I think of the high school my 2 oldest have graduated from, they graduated from Cuthbertson. And that is in Union County. However, it's a pretty good indicator of what the state has done as far as schools are concerned, moving everyone back to neighborhood schools. And I also, if you're interested in looking, have a breakdown of what West Charlotte looks like today and what Cuthbertson looked like. My daughter, many of you know her, she would get so mad because she went on many mission trips with this church. And she would come home and she would say, those girls, all they're worried about is their pocketbook, not matching their shoes. And there are people starving in this world. There are people starving right here. And so it just, the diversity was not there. And so I think diversity really added a lot of richness to our culture.
Jennifer, why don't you stand here?
Yep.
Jay, come on up. Gail, come on up. Let's thank all of them first. Videotaping this, and I'd like you to just take a moment, turn and talk to your neighbor. What did you hear? What was something you'd like to explore? So turn and talk right now, then we'll open for questions. Give you about 2 minutes to talk.
Very
So at this point, you've had a chance to talk a little bit, get out of the way. Right? We're going to do a good school thing. As you have a question, raise your hand. They'll call on you. We'll step up here. We'll go from there until about 2 or 3 minutes before lunch. Go ahead. Sure.
Greensboro, graduating class of 75. We had bomb threats. You didn't really speak to. We had a black prom and a white prom. Yeah, Greensboro's kind of a hotbed for racial tension.
We had bomb threats. I remember bomb threats and I don't know, not just in West Charlotte though. I think other schools
Right.
also had them around Charlotte.
And I came a little later than that. Actually, in the book, it refers to a school in Boston coming to see us.
Yeah.
Because we were, West Charlotte was kind of a model for this is how you do it.
Right.
By the time I got there. So,
Actually,
did
they
not
came
have
in
that.
'74, my first year there, and I remember the media frenzy because it was just such an interesting thing, and it was interesting. All I cared about was whether or not it made national TV. I did like that. Anyway, but it was really a pretty big deal, and I would say, as little as I was connected, I had some pride in that. Do you remember? I mean, that was really made a pretty big impression on me,
Right.
Despite my maybe disconnection with high school. Chris?
Yeah, so sort of more of a comment initially and then maybe a question. So I started kindergarten, I think the same year Jennifer did, I think. And we had just moved to Charlotte from Wisconsin. I knew nothing about Southern culture, nothing about Southern race relations, had never heard the N-word, did not know what was going on, did not know why everybody I met, first thing they asked me was, where do you go to church? It was such a culture shock coming to Charlotte from the Midwest. And one thing I would recommend to anybody who's interested to go back, who wasn't around here back then, to watch some of Ross McElway's documentaries from the 80s, a movie called Sherman's March, that is supposed to be about Civil War history, but it's actually about Charlotte in the 1970s and this guy coming south from Boston back to his parents who were trying to set him up with a nice Southern girl. And he made several films. One, I believe, was a teacher, maybe at West Charlotte. Her name was Charlene. He made a documentary about her. But anyway, it was just a very different time for those who weren't around here back then. And we went into the open schools from the beginning. So kindergarten, I went to Elizabeth Open Elementary. After 3 years, there was some pressure to create a traditional magnet school. So they moved us over to Irwin, which was another open elementary school. And then most of us went to Piedmont Middle School, which was right next to Piedmont Courts in Earl Village. So there were a lot of kids who lived right there who elected to go there because it was close, they could walk. And then everybody else came in from everywhere. And it was a total melting pot. We had all the ESL, a lot of the Southeast Asian refugee population that came to Charlotte in the early 80s went to our school. And they didn't have an easy time at our school, but our school was so much more accepting at Piedmont. I can't imagine what it would have been like for them at another school, because people were more accepting of them and welcoming than I think they would have been in other places. So I went back to a reunion at Piedmont for 80s and 90s graduates of Piedmont about 5 years ago. And I was blown away by how much that school had retained its character. It was the same school, and I was like, oh my God, it's exactly like it was. the approach to learning, the individual opportunities that people had to learn. And I mean, I think what I learned from going to Piedmont in particular was really to respect everybody. I know that sounds really trite and simple, but it was like we really interacted in a way with each other in a way that allowed us to learn to respect each other and appreciate the challenges that other people face. Like there was one guy in particular I'll share about who ran for secretary, I think, student government secretary in 9th grade. And he was not a good student. He was, you know, a marginalized African-American young man in that school. But he wrote a speech and he got up and he made his way through that speech and he dressed in a suit. And I think my proudest moment as a Piedmont Pirate was voting for Bronnie McNair for school secretary, because I appreciated how much harder it was for him to do that than some kid whose dad was a big city power broker who had all the advantage and lived in a big house in Myers Park. It was just a harder thing for him to get up and do, and harder to know whether anybody was supporting him in that. I think those kinds of experiences for me were some of the most important. And then I went to East Meck because I could walk there, it was really close. And black people at East Meck were totally marginalized in 1984. There was a very small population within the school. You didn't see them because they weren't in the same classes, the advanced classes that all the white kids were in. And they were treated badly. They were marginalized, you know. And it was really offensive to me the way that happened and the way the social sort of hierarchy of the white world worked as I saw it as a high school student. I was miserable. And I wished I had gone to West Charlotte. But I'm interested in how the open era, I don't know if you were there, I don't know when it ended, but I went back to West Charlotte in the 2000s as a middle-aged law student with a group of law students who were going to go over there and help try to do something about this 50% graduation rate, help kids with SAT prep and stuff like that. And I haven't finished the book, but I'm really concerned about how this school got from being a model school in the mid-'80s to being just a total disaster by the mid-2000s. And at the same time...
Come next week.
Well, and what I'll say in closing, maybe I'd love to hear y'all's comments, is that I remember as a kid being sort of concerned about the thought that some of my neighbors were being involuntarily sent across town. We were choosing and we knew why we were going. And I think I've always thought since then that the creation of more and better magnets that really entice people, like my daughter went to Northwest over on Beatties Ford Road. Great experience there, wonderful supportive environment, very personally involved teachers who, you know, with strong relationships. And that's what these schools have been, and that's why they're so powerful, so strong.
Thank you. Gail, could you just take a moment and talk about open classroom, what that meant, and then we'll get some other questions.
Okay, I'm not sure what it meant for the total school, but I did have an open accounting class, part of the open school. So the kids could learn at their own pace. You had to prepare lots of different modules, basically, so that they could learn at their own pace. Kids could come and go from the classroom as they felt the need, so it was just very open.
It worked.
Yes, for some students it did. For some students, of course, it didn't, yeah.
And I remember when I was there, it was the beginning of the open school, and we on the other side kind of looked over there in an envious way, you know, about this open school thing was going. And really didn't know much about it. It was just so new.
Right, yeah.
Other questions?
Yes.
Ms. Fox, now you mentioned you started at West Charlotte in 73.
Uh-huh.
So this would have been during the time that the black students were being bused out,
Yes.
but white students weren't yet being bused
No,
in.
they were.
They were at that
Yes.
I think it had started
There was a
73. It was
handful.
definitely the case.
So that was just wanted to ask for that clarification, but also, if you were at Hawthorne before and you went to West Charlotte, was that a role that you sought out, or was it a reassignment by the school system?
Both, I guess.
Okay.
I had difficulty with middle school, the age of the students. So every year I applied for a transfer. I just wanted to go to high school because I didn't go to middle school. I was a business teacher, but in middle school I taught science, PE, health. I taught whatever was left over, basically. Math, I even taught math. So I just wanted to get to high school. So that year, after 5 years at Hawthorne, the 6th year of teaching, I got to West Charlotte. And so I didn't really know much about West Charlotte. I was excited to just go to high school. But it turned out to be a wonderful experience for me. And you're right, the diversity you talked about, oh my gosh, I can't imagine my life without that now. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
One follow-up to that, particularly with the teacher makeup. One of the notes in the book, and it says that as they closed the black schools, Second Ward and other black schools throughout the system, the black teachers in those schools were let go. The school system then turned around and rehired new teachers that were predominantly white.
Okay.
And so, as Jay mentioned, the majority of his teachers, as he looks back in his yearbook, were white teachers. Were the teachers in West Charlotte new to teaching? Were they reassigned from other places? What was the general makeup there?
Well, the teachers in my department had been at West Charlotte. So, and they were of color. So, I mean, a lot of them were. So, I didn't think about that, I guess. I don't know, it didn't apply to me. Yes.
I'm a generation ahead of several maybe, but we had busing in the early 60s in the north. And when we had it, a lot of the teachers did change because the teachers that were teaching the black students were did not always have the same qualifications as the other teachers. And then when they started being more firm about hiring people who had teaching degrees and who had the right education for everybody, because the white parents were not going to send their white students to a black school where there were teachers without degrees.
Right.
So some of the loss of teachers is because of the qualifications they used for black schools.
Yeah.
You have to remember at the time, West Charlotte was the only black school who brought in a diverse population. The other schools that were diversified were white schools. So it was a very different dynamic for that reason.
I just wanted a little experience, and then y'all want to comment on anything, but my sister would have been here. They're not in Charlotte today, but she sent 3 kids through West Charlotte, and they were like 10 years later than you, Jennifer, and they would have graduated like in 95 and 97 and 99. And they still have a super fierce pride about graduating from West Charlotte, and they do come back for reunions when they can. The ones in Washington State, so not so much, but the other ones do attend reunions and just have a lot of pride and a lot of respect. And, it's colored their whole lives, and they will forever, I'm sure, send their kids to public school, even though they're all kind of well-to-do. When my children were in public school here, we did Sharon, AG Myers Park, but at Myers Park, when Will graduated in 97, so he was there there was very much a feeling of unrest at Myers Park because people were, West Charlotte was known as the premier high school. And people would walk around, parents and at PTA meetings, and, are you happy here? Aren't you trying to get your kids in West Charlotte? A lot of people would.
It's so different from 74.
Yeah.
We were West Chocolate, and nobody was really proud of that. We did. So it's really,
there were people who were putting them in that open school just to get them in there.
Yeah.
And then they might be able to not really do the open school, but, you know, or that kind of thing. But it was in that day, and that honestly is the reason they put the IB program at Myers Park, was because Myers Park parents were like, well, what do we have to attract anybody, you know? And so that, you know, was very interesting thought. You know, I would have never sent a child to private school just because you know, growing up in the public schools in Charlotte and such, I was just, even the opportunities that my kids had to be in social situations with all races was just so important. And, you know, I remember I graduated high school in '71, and I remember, you know, why Latin school was built and why Providence Day School was built. And
You mentioned those two schools. I'm not sure it's coincidence that they were established in 1970. I actually Googled it real quick
I will
just to
show
see
you, it's not.
It is not.
And they were both established in 1970. Now, Charlotte Country Day had already been around. Charlotte Christian was around, but as a small church school, and then began to grow at that point. So I don't think it's coincidence.
And I will say too that and I'll save it for when we meet later on, but when I heard they were gonna, you know, just go back to neighborhood schools, and all of a sudden we didn't have to fall under the, you know, thing anymore, I was just like, well, of course, you know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I would like to say, I don't know if any of you know Barry Sherman or not, but you do? Okay. He works with West Charlotte, and he gave a presentation that I attended not so long ago, and the school now is so different, so very different from what it was then in the 70s and 80s. And he says, you know, busing worked, you know, what are we going to do to get West Charlotte back to that feeling and standard that it had back then? So I don't know. I mean, I don't think busing's going to come back, but we do need help with that, with some of those schools.
On that same note, I did a little research when I was comparing the school that my two graduated from and West Charlotte currently. West Charlotte is 99% minority right now, 98% socioeconomically deprived. So when you compare that to even the times when you and I went through, it's a very different, I wouldn't say mix, because it's not.
Let's thank them. We want to. I'm sure they're going to hang around, but let's just do a context for a second. Last week was the first 35 years of West Charlotte before it becomes integrated. Today was sort of that 25-year period. Next week we already have the idea of what happened during that resegregation kind of place. And Annie, you want to talk about our speaker next week?
So
If you come up here, because they're videotaping it.
I contacted Ann Doss-Helms. She was a reporter for the Charlotte Observer. I knew her from when I had done inauguration trips and stuff. And she has been, you know, such an excellent reporter and knows the background. So I said maybe she would come and talk. And she said yes. And then she said, oh, by the way, I have a good friend named Ken Simmons who was principal at West Charlotte up till 1997 when a lot of the stuff changed, that's right before the lawsuit with CMS. So he's going to come. So that will be a very interesting discussion because there was a lot of controversy. There was a lot of controversy at that time, but a lot of changes came about as a result of that, and affected Providence, because I started at Providence in '97, and here were all these new West Charlotte teachers who had come from over there because of the changes that occurred there. So it affected the whole system. So I look forward to hearing what they have to say and our questions that we have for them. So thank you.
And then the following week, we look to have some people who are currently at West Charlotte. And then finally, the first Sunday in August, we'll have Dr. Pamela Grundy here to talk. And again, grounded in our beginning part of where is the justice in the whole process and what are we called to do, not just ourselves, but others in this area. That concludes our time for today. I'll let you spend time together. Thank you very much.
Amen.